Who was that down there? Representative Gasway, was that you? Oh, it's Ms. Marie. Well, I appreciate it. But thank y'all for coming to our higher ed meeting today. We've got two bills that are going to be heard for hearing only. And then what we'll do, we'll adjourn. And then we've got student finance that's going to educate our committee. And there'll be people coming and going. As y'all know, there's a ton of committee meetings going on right now. And that's why we're doing this hearing. So we'll get started with Representative Raffensperger. If you want to take the seats right up there. And looking at House Bill 179, it's as is. There's not a sub. So what you've got is what you see. And we look forward to hearing to your bill.
Should work just fine.
Check and make sure it's on, Representative.
Can you hear me?
Yep, you're good.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee, for hearing this bill today. I started working on this bill really during the vote on the House floor last year. And the reason that I brought it forward this year is at the end of the day, I believe that a test is a test. And what I noticed in the bill that we got through last year is that homeschoolers had to basically score at the 93 percentile, and public school kids would be at the 80th percentile on the ACT and SAT scores. And the bias against homeschoolers bothered me because I believe that school choice is the proper role for parents. I think the Supreme Court of the United States of America and the State Supreme Court of Georgia have consistently, with longstanding precedent, affirmed that parents have the fundamental right to decide on the right upbringing and educational option for their children. Consistent with that right, parents will choose between a wide variety of options for educating their children, which will include, but not be limited to, publicly funded schools, charter schools, private non-parochial schools, private parochial schools, online learning, private tutoring, and homeschooling as the parents best determine what is the best solution for their individual child. All parents of children residing in the state of Georgia pay local property taxes to city, county, and municipal school boards, with the exception for their local homestead exemptions for public education, either directly when they're a homeowner or indirectly when renting a dwelling or habitation. So everyone is paying school taxes, and some parents, because of the choices they make, really never use the public school system. So in the public interest to further equality and fair dealing for all parents who pay local school board taxes, I just felt that test scores for all children, regardless of the method and option of education, should be uniform. After all, a test is a test. So if you look at what I did with House Bill 179, I basically used the 80th percentile. And I really, the percentile that we choose, or if we want to go back and just choose a score, say 1200 on the ACT and on the SAT and 26 on the ACT, I really don't have a preference. I would just like to see equality. And so you're not discriminated against if you have a homeschooled child. At the end of the day, the test measures your performance. And that is the key determinant for the Zell Miller Scholarship, as I understand it. So that's really, if you work through the bill, you'll see that I really have just been consistent all the way through there for all people, regardless of where they were educated. Thank you.
Yeah, I just have just a few questions when I look through the bill, and maybe I can spur some committee members onto questions also. Look on line 18, and I want to compare it just for, I think, the knowledge of everybody that's working here. And we look at 28. What is an eligible high school, or not an ineligible? I mean, what's the difference?
Well, an eligible high school, I guess I just use my own high schools in my district, would be your typical, I guess, accredited, school, such as Johns Creek High School, Northview High School, Wesleyan. Those are some of the districts. So they would be the schools in your area, in your districts. That would be your public school or your Christian or private schools.
And so on 28, it says that a high school that is not an eligible high school. What is, for our committee's knowledge?
From my understanding, it's really, I guess you'd say it's almost non-traditional study. Online learning would be a non-traditional, and then there's other schools, but you'd have to fill that one in, sir, because I don't have the expertise on that.
Okay. I'm just curious. We'll ask our great crowd out here in a minute if they has the answer to that one. When I was looking over this, you look at 1,200 or 26, on the ACT. What is it currently? I'm just curious.
It currently, when I pulled up the Senate offers to finally substitute to HB 798, which was adopted in the Senate. I believe this is the final bill that we passed last year. If I could leave a copy of this for you, Mr. Chairman. But we had 1,226 in the bill that passed the Senate and passed both bodies last.
I guess what I'm asking is 1,200. You took out the 80th percentile.
Right.
Is that what 1,200 is now, or is it?
From my understanding, that's really what that they are supposed to be the same. And as I mentioned to the chairman and the committee, it's the will of the committee, but I'm fine if it's 1,200. I'm fine with if it's 80 percentile. My understanding was that 1,200 was the 80th percentile, and I was just like, I'm really. At the end of the day, I guess I've been pretty clear on what I'm after, is that homeschoolers would be at the same percentile, at the same score as people educated in a public school.
Do you feel like on this, I was thinking it's a bell curve, I think, from what I understand on this. And so when we move it, there are going to be some people who are going to be cut out, or we're going to add. Do you have an idea of how many would be eliminated or would be?
Well, I don't believe anyone would be, it's really, people would be added, and it would be really the, well, we hope that they'd be added, but it depends how their scores are. But if you make it, obviously you're lowering it for the Zellmiller Scholarship from 93 percentile, or the SAT and ACT scores that exist now for the homeschool students would go down to 80%. So there'll be more homeschoolers that will qualify.
Yeah.
But it will not affect the public school.
Yeah, have you thought about, how many representatives would be, how many more would come in? I guess because in the end,
about
we'll probably have to have
about 3% of the population, from my understanding, are home schooled right now.
Okay, because I'm wondering, I'll have to ask my advisor here, but we'd probably have to have a physical note, because I think there would be a definite impact on what we're spending, especially in Hope, Zell, and different things. I don't know. We'll have to find out. That's one of my curiosities. Got a couple of blinking. Gasaway? Not blinking? Oh. Ms. Chandler, go ahead. Yes, ma'am.
A couple of comments and a question, and thank you, Representative, for bringing this bill, because we have been moving toward this point, but we have not been there yet. Now, as far as unaccredited, that also could be a public school that has lost its accreditation. It could be a private school that has chosen not to be accredited or has not been able to get accreditation, as well as, the mom and pop that homeschools, or the homeschool schools that choose not to be accredited. I thought that it was going to be equal, everything was going to be equal for the eligible and the ineligible. But that's not the way I'm reading this. Help me, am I missing something? Because on line 18, the eligible high school student still has to have a 3.7 GPA and the 80th percentile or higher on the ACT, whereas ACT or SAT combined. And I believe that the home study or the unaccredited student would only have to have the 80th percentile. And am I missing something? Help me with that.
You're referring to on line 40 of a 3.3. Is that where you're going? And then on line 19 is 3.7. Is that?
Yeah, on line 19, we list for the eligible high school, the GPA and the 80th percentile. And
Right.
then we come over here to line 30, let's see, in in section 4, section 1,
Right.
4, we have the ineligible, and I think it's only the 80th percentile. Is that right? We're still counting that 3.7 for the eligible.
Right. I did not change any of the grade point averages from current law. It was really just the test scores that I changed. If it would be the will of the committee, that would be something for you to consider.
May I, Mr. Chairman? I think you and I discussed this. I think that we're requiring more with this bill for the eligible student, because that eligible student has to have that 3.7 and 80th percentile, whereas the ineligible student would be there. Many people would be hesitant to count grades coming from a home study program or someplace like that. So I'm not saying what needs to be done. I'm just saying they're not equal here. And then another thing I thought about, and my intentions were to look this up, and I haven't, but I think I know, that the Hope Scholarship now requires students eligible students can receive the Hope if they have a 3.0. Ineligible students have to have a score at the 75th percentile. Now, the 80th and the 75th isn't far behind. So, is that enough of a difference between the Zell and the Hope for home students, ineligible students? That's just a question. I don't know an answer, but something to think about.
Thank you.
Representative Mance, you're punched in, or you?
No, I didn't.
You're not?
I am 6.
I'm 6.
Yep, this direction.
Chuck Williams. Here we go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. Representative Raffensperger,
Sir.
in looking at this, since we're basically changing existing law or statute, if you will, I'm just curious, as you explored this, did you gain any insight on sort of what was the reasoning behind the language as it currently exists, why it was put in place in that fashion, and maybe what has worked and what hadn't worked? And I know you said you were looking at equalization between homeschoolers
Right.
and others. I'm just curious sort of why it looks like it does now, if you have any insight in that, or if you can address that. If not, if someone else maybe that speaks later can address that.
Representative Chandler began this process in prior sessions, I know, and I think that what came out of last year's session was the 93 percentile, basically for testing. I don't believe it started at that level. It just got moved around, and so there was an adjustment process as it worked its way through committee.
Mr. Chairman, if I can follow up, I'd just be curious, again, looking at that as, again, for anyone that can address it now or outside the scope of this meeting, what has worked or what has not worked about the existing legislation that would cause us to look at making changes.
Yes, ma'am, please, Representative Chandler.
Prior to last year, you will recall that ineligible students could not receive the Zell Miller going into college. Once they completed the first year of college, I believe with a 3.3, and I could have that wrong, I think that's right, they could receive that first year's cost of tuition retroactively. But we were losing some of our really strong ineligible students because they could go out of state and get a full ride and not have to pay anything up front. So we didn't want to lose those students. So that was the reason for that, going to a 93rd percentile, which is really high, but we were just trying to get them covered in some way. And that was a good place to start.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Can we look at, we had a question just on further education. Look, line 98, you're there in 89, section C, otherwise qualified student. I was looking at that, I just, since I haven't studied this bill as good as, and know it as well as the author does, we're raising it. So are we not, would that not eliminate a certain group of people?
Mr. Chairman, yes, I have to probably say in hindsight, I probably should have left that at 75 percentile, because as that went through committee last year, in that section, I believe that was set at a lower bar, and the reason it was because it was home study program, and those were students that you were attempting to reach, that I guess you'd say they'd have a non-traditional background. Probably typically have had more challenges, coming through the school system, just through to probably socioeconomic factors. And so if I was going to bring this back with modification, that's probably one of the first ones I'd make.
Okay. Thank you. Any other of our committee members have a question for the author? I will need to know, are there, do you have any other
Not
that
I
are
see.
testifying? No one's came up to me, Representative, asking to be. Was there anybody, we'll be informal. I've got Representative Perkle. You'll have to find a microphone that somebody will share with you. Right there, is that 7?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for allowing me to speak on this bill. I think it's great. And one of the things I want to communicate to the author, the last 3 4-H presidents, and today is State 4-H Day. The last 3 4-H presidents were homeschooled. The bill that you are presenting now would be beneficial to their families. They're great students, but putting a 93rd percentile for them to reach the Zell Miller is pretty significant. And my kids have been homeschooled before, so I'm just going to speak from the homeschool perspective. I would like to see the playing field leveled, and the adage that you had that spoke to me most is a test is a test. And that's where it's homeschool students take the same SAT and ACT tests that public school students do. And just as an advocate for the homeschoolers, I'd really like to see the playing field leveled. And I know it would impact these 3 families that were the 4-H presidents of the last 3 consecutive years. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Mathayak, over here.
Thank you, Chairman. And I would like to ditto that. I was also a homeschool parent for a short period of time. In the past, what has happened is some of our students our homeschool students end up taking the GED to enable them to get into a college. I like this because I'd like to see them take the ACT and SAT because I think they would perform very well. No, I wouldn't mind seeing that drop down to 75% too.
Get some good ideas there, I believe.
Yes,
Got number 9.
Yeah, Mr.
Costas,
Chairman.
Representative.
And also a homeschool parent. And I kind of echo what Representative Chandler was saying, though. What we're finding today in equalizing home study students is that grade point average is not considered because they're not in an eligible high school. So I do echo the discrepancy between paragraph 1 and paragraph 2 in the sense that the home study student does not have a GPA to reflect. So I think if we were leveling the playing field, we need to relook at that GPA in section 1 for regular students that are in eligible high schools, because we are imposing on them not just the 80th percentile, but also a 3.7 GPA. Whereas a home study, unless they're doing dual enrollment, will not have a GPA to show. Right. And so I think that it would be a better bill if it was just 80th percentile SAT across the board with no GPA consideration.
Representative Costas, you made our bill sponsor his eyebrows go up. and the thoughts of that.
Mr.
Yes,
Chairman,
sir,
I bring
please.
this bill before you today in the interest of moving this forward, and I would welcome, you know, all comments, and I would love to work with the chairman and other committee members to see if we could work over this biennial to come up with a great result. I appreciate your comments today.
Well, I
Thank you
hope
very
that you'll
much.
take time to meet with Representative Costas on this. Representative Chandler, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I just mentioned one other thing that I hadn't caught until somebody said it a while ago. If I'm reading this correctly, cursively, I thought I had read it, but I hadn't apparently very well. If we move the hope requirement to the 80th percentile, that's the same as the Zell Miller.
It'd be my intention for the Zell Miller. Did I miss something here?
Well, maybe I'm missing it wrong. Look at, I'm looking
sorry.
at line 97, and this is under the Hope Scholarship section, and it's saying graduated from a high school which is not an eligible high school, and having to have a score at the 80th percentile. Then that would be the same as
Right.
the Zell.
And that's the, yes, Representative, that's the one that I told the chairman earlier that I should have kept that at 75.
Oh, okay,
So-
I missed that. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I apologize for putting that in there.
And again, 75th and 80th is
Pretty close.
Is pretty close. So, is there enough variance there? I mean, I don't know.
We have a question, Chairman Knight. You have. You need to go to the microphone, Chairman, please.
I see where you're going, and you know, applaud trying to make sure we've got equal ways to test in. But one thing, that if we're going to study this, you know, over the interim, we've probably got historical records. What would be the change in the number of scholarships? In other words, you know, from a number of students. In other words, we could probably retroactively look at, I would think, and maybe some of the folks from Regents or the student, you know, over Hope could look at that and see, you know, what kind of hit is it. I think that would be helpful going forward, because again, we do have limited resources, so we may have to reallocate all the way across the board.
Okay, thank you.
David? Somebody down here? Never mind. Okay, thank you. Any other committee members have a question for our bill sponsor? Well, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
And I hope you get together with a couple of our folks and we keep working on this. I think everybody thinks it's a good idea.
Thank you.
Next up, Representative Dollar. And on House Bill 229, like I said, this is a hearing, and you know we'll be pretty informal. Have Representative Dollar's going to speak to his bill. I've got Chancellor Wrigley that wants to speak to the bill in a little bit and kind of give us their side of this. And you know, we look forward to certainly hearing everybody's opinion and the committee members. Please don't be shy with a question. Chairman Dollar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, we are talking today about HB 229. This might look familiar to many of you guys. This is almost the identical language that was introduced last year by former Representative Matt Ramsey. And first, I want to tell you what does the bill do. The dramatic increase in the cost of higher education nationally and here in Georgia is resulting in numerous consequences for our constituents, from deterring low-income students from applying to school to student loan debt reaching crisis proportions. The increase in tuition costs has outpaced every single economic indicator, from GDP to median income to inflation in recent years, resulting in serious financial hardships for our constituents. Numerous states have begun to look for legislative mechanisms to slow the growth in cost to attend college, and that is precisely the goal of this bill. This bill offers a measured approach to limiting the growth of the cost to attain higher education. I have a handout for the members. I'll bring it. I'll have it prepared next time. It basically has a graph of a table showing the growth that a lot of institutions in the state of Georgia, but just for an example, in the big three, University of Georgia, Georgia Tech, and Georgia State, between the years 2005 and 2015, the aggregated rate of tuition growth was over 100%. So here's how this bill would work. Each year, tuition increases at University System of Georgia institutions would be limited by both the previous year's average state tuition among 2- and 4-year institutions and the annual rate of inflation. Average tuition would be calculated separately for both 2- and 4-year institutions. For institutions whose previous year's tuition was equal to or below the state average, tuition increase would be limited to the rate of inflation times the average tuition. For institutions whose previous year's tuition was greater than the state average, tuition increases would be limited to the rate simply of inflation. And the limitation formula for student fees would be basically the same model. If you were at or below, then it's the aggregate with inflation and so on. This bill also provides it also provides a mechanism for institutions to seek a waiver for these limits subject to approval by the House Higher Education Appropriations Subcommittee and the Senate Higher Education Committee. Appropriate circumstances for a waiver to be approved would include one, a recession, a decline in state appropriation, a change in institutional mission, the consolidation of institutions, and any additional circumstances deemed appropriate by the committees. And that, Mr. Chairman, is the conclusion of my remarks. I am happy to help answer any questions that I'm sure you may have. Yes, ma'am.
If you'll find the mic. Representative Bentley. Is that seven?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you, Representative Bentley. Thank you, Representative Dollar, for your work on this legislation. As a parent with a student at Fort Valley State University, what does this bill actually mean for me? I just want to be real clear on that. Thank you.
It means that it would give you some certainty to know that next year your tuition is not going to go up 25%. That's what it would do. It would say whatever the consumer price index says is the rate of inflation, assuming your school is just at about the state average for tuition, then that's how much your tuition for your fees and your tuition could go up next year. Mm-hmm.
Chairman Knight. You got
Go back over your formula, your averages, if you will. Maybe elaborate on that. The 2-year average, the 4-year average. They take the state average, like for all 4 years, and then they do it separately for all 2 years. And if you're below that average, then whatever that state average is, you can raise the tuition like next year at that state average with inflation. If you're above it, then you can only do inflation. So that's how that works. If you're above the average, so it allows for institutions that are under that state average to raise it a bit more. If I may.
yes, sir. Might move to the microphone, please. Sorry.
I want to make sure I understand this, but for instance, we've got our different university systems. Our different universities out there, and we certainly have our research universities, and we have our universities that are wanting to be research universities, and then we've got our 4-year institutions, and they're all at different levels, but certainly the cost of like you said, our big three. So if we're averaging them down, or putting them in the average of all 4, and say, I don't know, maybe somebody from the Regents could speak to maybe what would be one of our 4-year schools that is not as big and maybe have a lower tuition.
I think
Georgia College, okay, but are we artificially raising them up or allowing them to raise up higher with the formula? And
I
then
think
we're topping out our research, our 3, research.
I think the college of thought here, to pardon the pun, is that we wanted to take from as large a pool as possible, and if we start dividing them up however artificially those delineations might be. But to the point of this bill, we separate into 4-year and 2-year institutions. That's a conversation I'm willing to have and explore, and at this point, this is an idea.
No, but I want a clarification because that may be helpful in your discussion as you look at the bill.
Thank you.
Representative Casas.
And where would that, would the baseline, the average, when would that be determined? Like where the tuition is right now? Is that where you would establish the average?
It would be whenever this law if it were to go into effect, then whatever the tuition would be. So for next year's tuition, it would be whatever the previous years would be.
Okay.
Whether this goes into effect this year, next year, 5 years from now.
Okay.
Yep.
Very good. So if I'm an institution and I know this is coming, I can technically raise my tuition in order to raise that average.
I think the bill
Would they
is
ever do
designed.
that,
Never,
Mr.?
never.
I think the bill is designed so that if you want to raise tuition mid-year, then yeah. But I don't think that's how. I don't think that's how it would operate in reality, though.
Okay.
It would go into effect if this were to pass. This would go into effect January of next year.
January of next year.
Yeah.
Okay.
January 1.
Representative Gasaway.
Yeah, I agree with sort of Chairman Knight's questions too about how you draw the line between clearly disparate groups within these subsets. But also, there's a lot of schools in our state that are trying to innovate and reduce costs with different kinds of programs, and I'm concerned that that's not considered, and they may actually hurt themselves with this type of formula by coming up with these online, say, degrees that are a lot cheaper. So that's sort of what I'm trying to, we got to work through that part too. It's a complicated question, but these are certainly not, all places aren't created equal for sure. And we've got a lot of demand, it seems like, for a lot of these schools in Georgia. They're hard to get into. So I'm also looking at that part going, well, they're doing something right. I know that they all know, everybody in this room knows the costs are going through the roof and we've got to do something, but they're also have got a lot of successes that we don't want to.
The problem you're seeing is that there's not certainty in what it's going to cost to go to school, and it is spiraling. And lower income, flat out, can't afford to go. Those that can, they come out with crippling student debt, and and this bubble's, it's going to do what all bubbles do. It's going to burst, and it's not just happening in Georgia. It's happening around the nation, but it's going to take a couple of states to step out and be leaders on this. I think and I understand the universities and I've got I understand their arguments, and I've got a lot of friends back here sitting behind me, and I'm trying to provide some job security here with this bill for them, but that's a joke, everybody. But I understand, and most of this is driven by, is my understanding, is driven by payroll, and they're trying to hire the best professors that they can, and supply and demand is raising that. I guess my issue is that once you buy into that justification, then you're rubber stamping all increases in perpetuity. And, where does it stop? Because we have seen this kind of go out of control in the last 15 years here. So.
One other idea, if I may.
Sure, please.
What about it, instead of looking at a year-to-year basis, if we looked at some type of a 5-year or a longer term, because it would sort of smooth out some of the ups and downs that they may have to manage for. You may have a year where you're replacing staff that's very expensive, and so your costs go up, and then you have 4 years where your costs are contained. So it may be another idea to look at it over a better term.
and there are some safeguards built into this for special circumstances such as what you're describing, I feel.
You mean the part about coming to the legislature?
Well, they can do that with the tuition, and then the student body can the student body can vote to raise fees in this bill as well. So, or to have certain fees not go into the equation. So they're, the student body has control over the fee section, and then the tuition part, we have a safeguard.
Yeah, I'm just focused on the tuition part, but
And
I haven't studied that part.
That's
Okay.
a good idea, and we should look at it, Representative.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just had a couple just questions as I was looking through the bill. On slide 33 or so, it talks about the Student Finance Commission. I guess, what was it, say certifying it? Why are we doing, why are we bringing them into certification of what really is a consumer price index? It's published by the government. It's kind of easy. They know what it is. That's just one question I had.
I think that the idea there is just to get them involved in this.
Okay. We'll talk to them too about
Okay.
their involvement. I'm just curious why we do that. And I guess one that, it's a theoretical question, sort of like others have had. Will they not use this as during the good times of, and I know you mean this in a critical way, Ms. Chancellor, and others, that we're going to have inflation someday. We've just been through a very low inflationary time economically, but there's going to be inflation, Mr. Chairman, and I just wonder if, their costs will go up too, but will they ride that up and maintain that high level or higher level? That's one thing that just, when I was thinking about this, is that an issue that would come up?
Well, when you see the graph, at very, very few schools has the rates gone up lower than, much, much, much lower than the rate of inflation. If we were doing rate of inflation, we would be, for the last 20, 30 years, we'd be in a far different position than we are now. So, obviously no one can control or predict what inflation is going to be, but this, from where we sit right now, it's a fairly good indicator.
And I think committee members need to know that this is enabling legislation for a constitutional amendment, because that's what that's what this is.
Yeah,
I don't think you mentioned that. or
Sorry,
not.
so it wasn't in the folder. That's why I didn't mention it. But it's House Resolution 159 is a resolution. So this would be on the ballot.
Yeah.
And thank you for pointing that out, Chairman.
Yes, sir. Chairman Knight, question.
Another question, and I know we're focusing on Georgia, Georgia residents and Georgia students, but how are we comparing or to other states, maybe, in the southeast around us, as far as tuition hikes and things like that? Do you have any?
I'll let the other folks back here behind me address that. I'm just speaking more to my constituents and trying to react to
But
them.
I guess, are we out of line? Are we driving students off to other states? Legitimate question. How are we? Is Georgia? Are we outpacing everybody?
I think there's people better suited to answer that question than myself, Representative.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, Representative Chandler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I would like to hear, when the Chancellor comes and speaks, Representative, the explanation of how this would impact our research institutions. I think that's an important point. And I had a college person to say to me today, and I don't believe that person is here. And again, Representative, you may want to speak to it, or the Chancellor. This person said to me, in the years when the rate of inflation does not go up, our costs still go up. And this would be very detrimental to us. It's a thought.
You're causing people to think, Representative Chandler.
I'm sorry. I need to do that myself.
Representative Holcomb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is the working title of this the Affordable Education Act?
It can be.
Okay. I figured I'd have some fun. I really appreciate the comments, and I applaud you for what you're trying to do, because it is a major issue of giving students the opportunity to get the education that they need. And all of the data suggests that the more training that they have, particularly if they have associates and bachelors, the rates of income that they enjoy throughout their lives are orders of magnitude different. So I applaud you for that. I do, these are more concerns than questions of, I do have some concerns along the lines that others have expressed in terms of how this could be implemented, because the variables all tie together in some degree. And my understanding is that many state institutions across the country and here in Georgia, the level of funding that they get from the states is really quite low. I think University of Virginia is now less than 10% is what they get from their state government. And so they have to come up with those resources in other places, from other places, and one of those has been through tuition. And in terms of the salaries, I hear where you're coming from there, but then that ties to the rankings of our institutions. And University of Georgia and Georgia Tech are real gems, and that's in part because we have high-quality, talented faculty, and we may lose them if the universities can't compete by having the resources that they need to keep them. Little market-based principles there. So I've got concerns with how we would implement it, but I think everybody agrees with the overall goal of keeping the tuition and costs down. And I wish I had the magic recipe on how to unlock it all, but I think as we proceed through there, we need to do it very carefully, because each piece of the puzzle will have an impact on the overall scheme.
Thank you, and I agree. And none of us want to see the consequences that you described happen. And you talk about the magic bullet. There is no easy way to do this. I feel that this is probably one of the fairest and best ways. Again, just want to continue this conversation from last year. That's again why I appreciate the chairman asking me to come speak today.
I just have a couple other questions. When you look at, I'm just curious, Chairman, has this been done in other states? I mean, that's one thing I haven't done research on, maybe the chancellor can address that. But have you looked and see what has this sort of thing been done? And what are to answer Representative Holcomb's question, is the fallout?
It's my understanding that there are some states that are looking at legislative remedies, but I don't know of any that are doing it exactly like this. That's not to say that they're not. And I will get our crack office staff on that. And
they are a crack office staff.
I'll get our staff to work just right away,
Absolutely.
Mr. Chairman.
And the other one, I think the committee needs to look over on line 78. Just kind of flip over there. And this is one of those things you better weigh carefully, because if you kind of read it, and I'll just summarize it very quickly, is that if something were to happen, if we had 2008 again, or 9, hope that we don't do that, that this committee and others would have the ability to give them a waiver. And you'd have the room full of angry parents and whatever saying, you're going to raise my tuition.
Actually, in the bill, Representative, this committee is not a part of that. And I think the reason that it puts the Appropriations Committee in there is because it's the Higher Ed Committee in the Senate, but in the House, it is the Appropriations Subcommittee of Higher Ed. And that is because we are the House of Revenue Origination Bills, so that's why.
Well, many of y'all may be on that committee as time moves on, Mr. Chairman, and that's something to really think about, because that would be a difficult moment when you would have to do something like that, and just weigh that and be thinking about that.
That's why they pay us the big bucks, Chairman.
Yes, sir. Any other committee members have who signed me up for that? For
make those difficult decisions.
For Chairman Dollar, any other committee got? Right here. Yes, ma'am.
I have one
Rhonda
question.
Burnout.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
This is my
Go
first
ahead.
time doing this. How would this affect the smaller schools like your HBCUs? Because in that one part where he was reading about the consolidation, I mean, how would they fare with the changes here?
They would be subject to, I mean, I would have to assume that the schools you're referencing, their tuitions are below state average, so they would have a bit more flexibility in what they could raise with their fees and their tuition.
Okay.
That's how. I hope that answers your question.
Mm-hmm.
And that was your first question
Yeah.
in a committee ever, anywhere?
Ever.
Well, congratulations.
Thanks.
Any others for good chairman? Ms. Bentley.
I guess just for the sake of our new members, can we explain why this would be a constitutional amendment if it gets that far?
Because it is dealing with appropriation. So anything by law, we are not allowed to do anything with money without it having to go on the without it having to go through that process. I mean, back in the day, not too long ago, maybe 15 years ago, if we wanted to do a specialty tag and it had a revenue share with the wildflowers or, departments, and each one of those license plate tags had to be on the ballot as a constitutional amendment. So, but we changed that, but that's why, just anything dealing with revenue.
Thank you.
And
or
I'm gonna
money,
let-
anything doing with money.
I'll probably have Chancellor address this too, but I think it's really that separation of the Board of Regents and us.
Yes, sir.
And the financing and dedicating dollars.
Well, that's, yeah.
And I
That's
think
it.
that's really
Mhm.
the bottom line on that. Any other members? Good. Thank you, Chairman Dollar.
Thank you, Chairman.
We appreciate it. And next up, we'll have
I will-
Chance.
Oh, I'll be here for the.
He will be. We will. I know you've got somewhere, I think you got a Ways and Means meeting also you're trying to work in. Oh, okay. This is a priority. Well, we appreciate that. Next, we'd like to hear from our good Chancellor. He's come to meet with us today. And, like I said, this is informal. You'll have an opportunity to ask him questions. I think you'll find him very easy, approachable, and willing to listen. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about college affordability with you today. First, the General Assembly and the Governor have been very good to the university system in terms of supporting our quality academic programs, and as a result, we continually have programs and institutions ranked among the best in the nation. And I know that you're proud of that, and we're proud of that. We also know that for our citizens to have access to those programs, we understand that affordability is essential. There are many ways to think about affordability, and you have heard me speak to them a couple of times already. The obvious one is tuition. Another area is associated costs of attending college, like the cost of textbooks. Another is how long it takes to complete a degree program. Final area is our institutions offering programs in as efficient manner as possible. We do recognize the ultimate focus of affordability is tuition. We understand it's a source of concern for you, for the people of our state, and we share that concern. We are committed to working with you and being stronger partners on tuition and the cost of college. In fact, we've likely had more discussions about tuition and the status of tuition with you in the last year than we ever have before. We have heard you loud and clear, as I've indicated before. The dialogue has been very important to us, and we do take it very seriously, and we will continue to take it very seriously. And as a result of that dialogue, for the current academic year, we did not raise tuition. In the past, we have made tuition efforts to keep tuition rates and increases very low. Over the last 5 years, tuition has increased at an average of only 2.5% a year. And we are committed to keeping increases as low as possible and committed to discussions with you about what those increases should be. We also recognize that fees also drive up the cost of college for students. To help put the brakes on rising fees, our institutions must demonstrate a clear business need for a fee increase in order for it to be considered by the board. With greater scrutiny, we have significantly reduced the number of fee increases in the last 5 years. For example, the number of fee increases in the 5 years ago dropped from 67 that were approved to only 14 for the current fiscal year. Controlling the cost of textbooks is another area where we can do something about affordability. we are determined to cut the cost of textbooks through better use of open source and online materials. Textbooks and almost all of our online eCore courses are free to students, and we are exploring ways to expand what we offer. Our efforts have received national attention. Last summer, the USG was ranked #1 by Rice University for saving students more than $3.5 million in textbook costs in 2016. Another way to improve affordability is we're changing how we teach and advise students so they can complete their degree programs on time. Let me share some examples with you. Our advisors are providing degree roadmaps so students avoid spending time and money in courses that do not count toward their degree. As part of our 15 to Finish effort, campuses encourage students to take 15 credit hours a semester, thus shortening the time it takes to graduate. Our institutions also increasingly use an early alert system to monitor student performance so that a low test grade may signal a counselor to provide tutoring and enable the student to complete the class successfully. These initiatives are moving students in the right direction. They are beginning to graduate in a shorter time frame, and as a result, they save money by avoiding extra semesters and unneeded classes. We're also looking in the mirror to improve efficiency. You're probably familiar with our campus consolidations. 6 years ago, we had 35 institutions. With the start of 2017, we now have 28. The primary driver behind consolidation is to better serve students. It also enables us to reallocate current revenues from savings, about $24 million to date, to the classroom to reinvest in faculty and students. We recognize there is a lot of national discussion around the amount of funding spent on higher education administration. It's one reason we pursue consolidations, to reduce administration. We are looking at other ways to contain these costs. As another way to increase access, we've also dramatically expanded our online course offerings in the last 6 years, providing additional avenues for students to complete a degree. Before closing, I would also like to share some additional context with you regarding our work with the Georgia Department of Audits last year on their study of college affordability. The report, which was released late last year, indicates that due to the harsh realities of the economy in 2002 and 2009, state funding for public higher education decreased from covering 75% of the cost to covering approximately half of the cost. Tuition and fees were used to help offset the loss in state funding and cover the cost of growing student enrollment in the university system. Yet the increases in tuition and fees did not fully offset the loss in state funding. In fact, state funding per full-time student today is the same level as it was in 1998. Despite all that, the state audit report cited the university system's tuition and fees averaged 25% less than what institutions in peer states charge. Regarding USG spending, when adjusted for inflation, USG institutions increased annual spending per full-time student at just over 0.5% per year between 2006 and 2015. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I commend the state audit report to you. We learned a great deal from it, and it was valuable to us. We do have one of the strongest university systems in the country, and it's envied by those in other states. We have 2 universities in the top 10 list for best college value. These achievements and others are the result of your support and your investment, and we are grateful for both. We cannot achieve our goal to increase the number of Georgians with a college credential without your support. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today, and we look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chancellor. Chairman Carter?
I have a couple of questions of curiosity. One is, since the chairman, the sponsor, brought this up, 2005 to 2015, can you, and perhaps you can give it to us later, because I'm asking some questions that require maybe some research, but can you let us know what the percent of state dollars to higher education in 2005 to, say, 2015? Not necessarily by the year, but if you have maybe some significant years to share. And secondly, how much the percentage of tuition went up per year from 2005 to 2015. I would like that in every single year. How much did it go up?
Okay,
Thank
we can
you.
do that. Yes, ma'am. Happy to.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I just, as I was looking, there's no other buttons lit up, so I had a few just questions. I wish you'd explain a little bit about the early alert system that you were talking about.
Okay.
I think
and
that's something that's been an impact that I've seen. I've
Okay,
just
and it
heard
may be
about.
something that, that we could share with the committee in more detail. Georgia State in particular has been a pioneer and a national leader using data analytics, monitoring student progress. One example is if a student decides they want to major in chemistry and the gateway course they do poorly in, the institution will intervene and maybe counsel with that student, try to get them to see if chemistry is really their field or not. Maybe they should perhaps think about something else, or they work with they do a variety of number crunching, which is really pretty remarkable. And as I said, Georgia State could make a great presentation on it to check students along the way, and if they see they're doing poorly in a series of courses, or if there's a performance in a grade in a certain course, they follow literally big data so that they can intervene with the student's performance early in their career, rather than, frankly, the old sink or swim model that we had in higher ed. But I'd be happy to get you more information about that, because, as I said, Georgia State and a number of our other institutions have adopted this approach, and it's making a lot of difference with respect to the retention rates which we're seeing. And Georgia State has driven its graduation rate from something like 34% to 54% in just like 10 or 12 years. So
That's a great impact. That's just something I had learned about recently. Chairman Dickey?
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Chancellor, being here, and I know I'm very proud of the quality education that our universities, colleges have, and even though we have had these increases, and you made the statement, raise tuition as little as possible. Now, could you expand on why, a little more specifically, when you say as little as possible? Is it just salaries, or is it the other things? I mean, go ahead.
It's a great question. It's a variety of factors. Part of the mix is state funding. On individual campuses, it may vary a little bit. Part of it is the competition for the best faculty. And at a place like Georgia Tech, the competition is pretty fierce. There are other factors that do drive costs up, but we look at a variety of
Can I ask you, faculty, the demand for faculty? I know we've had an increase in student population in our state and maybe nationwide, I guess. Are we turning out enough professors, enough PhDs to teach courses? Is the rate of students compared to the rate of PhDs turned out nationwide? Have we got a shortage of teachers, PhDs?
There's not a shortage now, and it can vary by discipline. And certain disciplines, it is more expensive to hire a qualified faculty member. Accounting and physics, the salaries will be significantly higher than other disciplines. I don't think there's a shortage right now. It is something that there's some concern about on the horizon, but right now we don't have a shortage.
Do y'all look at that when y'all courses taught and disciplines at universities that, hey, we need some more physics teachers? That what can we do to turn out more of those?
We do, and we rely on the institutions to help signal that to us, and rely on them a lot to help signal to us where they are having competitive pressures. The funding formula reflects that to some extent. Different disciplines are weighted differently in the formula, so that is another way to address it.
Pardon me, Representative Gazaway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is more of a macro question, because I see this sort of like our competition with neighboring states in economic development, and we sometimes have to really spend to get ahead of it. You've really got a international and certainly national competition. Is there a point where we're going to get over the hump? Are we winning this arms race, or I'm just wondering if you see macro trends that maybe things we're in now are going to get better because of a bigger picture, or is it just going to continue to go like it is?
With respect to
How much it costs, like professors, like we're fighting for these top-notch professors. we're in this technological swing that we've really been in since really 98, 99. Where will it end? I don't know. Is that part of this, that we're in so much new, because we have some technology schools here in the state, as well as California and Massachusetts, and you know, do you see, because you have a historical perspective, do you see us kind of getting over the hump and this becoming more efficient, or is it just going to be chasing the future?
It could be both. I do think we're becoming more efficient. I believe that, and we stress that, and we will continue to stress that, and finding different ways to offer instruction is very important to us. Online becomes more efficient over time. Online instructional materials, as we've already seen, really can save students money. So those are areas where I think we're over the hump, and we'll continue to do better. At the institutions that do have to play in the national and international labor market, if you will, for faculty, I think we'll chase that for a while. That's just the nature of the competition, and we compete with our best institutions compete with the best ones in other states, and frankly, around the world too.
Right. But you don't follow up.
Please go ahead.
You don't. Nobody's out there. No smart people are guessing that this may be a trend, because it was technology approached, and these new things that we're dealing with that weren't even taught when I was in school. Are we just in a technological time? Has anybody written on this where universities, higher end universities, are just off to a new stratosphere that we don't see it ending, or it's going to end in 2050 as far as innovation?
I think it will vary by institution and by discipline to some extent with respect to hiring faculty and utilizing technology. I don't. There are a lot of things written about competition for faculty and where instruction is headed. And a lot of people think there'll be less need for physical structures for instruction and those kinds of things. We hadn't seen a lot of trend in that area, but I think it will vary, and I think by institution in particular, with our system being organized the way it is.
Because that certainly lends itself to would you say it's fair to say our institutions are going to become more unique?
I think some of them will, and more specialized, but I think some will remain with comprehensive offerings, as I think they need to be.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Next, Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. Chancellor, thank you for being with us today. The issue I'd like to ask you to address is one that was, again, recently covered by the media, and it's the issue of compensation that continues when presidents, senior level administrators, professors leave. And I recognize from a human resources standpoint, some of that may be built into contracts on the front end and whatnot. I can tell you it's tough when you're having that informal Friday afternoon town hall meeting at the barbecue joint to explain to the guys that work for the county road department what's going on in the world of higher education and why are we allowing that. Can you speak to Georgia's uniqueness or lack thereof and what appears to be a high level of those scenarios, and maybe any efforts that either are underway or can be underway to try to deal with those on the front end so that we don't have those situations in what appear to be abundance?
Yes, and where we fit nationally, I don't necessarily have data on that. I don't think we're out of line with this, an approach which has been common in higher ed in some ways. Some of the media focused on some deferred compensation payouts, which is, as you pointed out, different. We're already rethinking our approach to how we treat presidents that might be departing an institution. I don't. I'm not trying to, cop out on it, I guess. But I wasn't part of the prior discussions. But each situation is unique. I think each situation has specific reasons why a departing president was treated in a certain way. I think in some cases, my view going forward would be in some cases, a president may simply want to stop being president and return to teach. And I think that is something that, given that person's expertise and ability to teach, we'd want to look at. The compensation ought to reflect the change in role in the institution, and I feel pretty strongly about that. But it is something we're looking at. We can kind of check around the country to see where we fit in those things. But it is very much on our radar screen, I can tell you. So
Thank you.
sure.
If I can follow up on that, what, it may be too specific, but what pot of money would something like come out of, and would it be reflected on from student tuition, or would it come through another, outside source that a foundation may? Thank you.
Yeah,
Mr.
it's a
Chairman.
good question, and it does vary. Sometimes it's state funded. Other times, some of the deferred compensation programs are funded with foundation funds, and it varies based on how the individual contract was negotiated at the time. But in the larger compensation packages in our system, the foundations often participate in those.
I just want to echo the Vice Chairman's comment that these are hard discussions to have in communities. And I know that you're listening, and I think it's a good opportunity to talk about it with us.
Yes, sir.
Next was Representative Metz. You're 8, is that right?
I don't know. Am I?
Yes, ma'am.
Whatever.
There you
Yeah.
go.
But as I said, it's good seeing you again, Chancellor. And I guess I have a statement as opposed to a question. This has been years ago when I started my doctoral program at the University of Georgia. It would have been good back then. I know that you mentioned something about online courses. Could you tell us a little about that? I probably would have graduated if you've had the online courses back then when I first got started. Back and forth from Atlanta to Athens, wasn't easy at all. So could you talk a little about the online program that you have?
Sure, I'd
And
be
how
happy
popular
to,
is it?
Yes, I'd be happy to get you some more information on that. Online, not just in Georgia but nationally, has grown in popularity dramatically the last 6 or 7 years. For a variety of reasons, and accessibility is one of the main ones. And in our state, we have a program called eCore, which is our prime means of offering the core classes. I think it's 27 or 28 classes that we offer that any student enrolled in any institution in the USG can enroll in an eCore class. The textbooks are free as part of that program. There are other online courses. We have a program we're calling eMajor that we're building out a lot of majors so that you could get a 4-year degree entirely online, and that's in development. We've gone from something like 1,500 online courses, I think in 2009 or 10, to over 6,000 now.
Wow.
So it's grown significantly. And those courses have to go through the same approval process that a regular in-class course goes through. But it's growing. Georgia Tech has gotten a lot of attention for some master's programs that they've offered. But associates, bachelor's, master's, and PhDs, some are online only, and some have some blended approach. But it's very much a part of our instructional package now, and will continue to grow, I think.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, ma'am. Representative Casas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chancellor, thank you. I want to go back to the realities of costs. As you mentioned, personnel tends to be one of the ones, and of course it varies institution to institution. And putting aside the big three, since they usually have more resources. We're talking like in my neck of the woods, Georgia Gwinnett College, or something smaller like that. What is a reality for a president when he has to hire let's say a PhD in finance or a PhD in physics? What is he facing as far as market salary?
I'd have to get you the exact numbers, but a PhD in accounting is probably, I hate to guess, 140, 150, maybe higher. And I want to check that because I don't know for sure. Finance, those kinds of disciplines, the salaries are going to be in that range. There aren't always as many applicants, obviously, in those fields. So the competition can be pretty serious, and a lot of times in a lot of those disciplines you're competing with the private sector and competing with someone who may want to practice accounting, for example, practice law or whatever. So,
And I'm assuming that if my
Yes,
I have
sir,
a follow-up,
please.
I'm assuming that if a president does not fill that position, he could put accreditation in jeopardy.
or they won't be able to offer the class, yeah.
Right.
Because you've got to have a qualified person in the class.
So I would go back to the subject matter of this whole hearing. Would a bill that, or a mechanism that kind of limited those tuition increases, would that be something that would hamper a president that was facing, let's say, a situation where he did need to fill a finance PhD or an accounting PhD and find himself having to scrounge for money?
I think anything that takes away flexibility could be a hamper on the president's ability to hire the people they need to hire.
Thank you, Representative Costas. I think Chairman Knight. 7. Sorry. Okay. There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chen. First of all, is it 3 or 4? Talk about the research universities.
Well, there's 4 R1s, research universities.
Yeah, university.
UGA, Tech, and Georgia State, and Augusta University.
Yep,
Augusta
there you go.
University is not R1.
3. I want
Those are our 4.
We always forget the, but.
Those are our 4 that are in the research,
Yeah.
in our research university sector.
Yeah. Augusta, we always forget, but we have 4.
We have 4 in our
are indeed
research
lucky.
sector, yes.
So, I guess in hearing some of the testimony, we look back and sometimes tough times around here, especially going through some of the budget crisis that we have, sometimes is not a bad thing, which I think is probably what has prompted some of what is happening with the regents and taking some of these measures. It's probably forced us over the years to look at some of the things that you've just talked about, alerts and, making sure that we got good guidance. College is no longer a 6-year proposition. It should be back to a 4-year studied. So I think we are doing some of those things, and obviously in the consolidation process, y'all are looking for, duplicative administrative, costs that you can cut out, saving money or reallocating back to students. One of my questions would be, is Representative Gasaway had just said, we go in, we're always learning, there's always new things, but college, to some degree, I would argue, is the core is to prepare people to go out and make a living, support their families, and whether you're a doctor, a professional, a lawyer, accountant, a scientist, a computer, whatever it is. Have we gone back and looked within our course offerings? Do we have things that are no longer relevant in a sense of we were teaching it years ago and it's no longer necessarily relevant? And not that knowledge, I don't want to step off somewhere I shouldn't, but knowledge is always relevant. But are we looking at things that are no longer relevant in today's society? Or sometimes you look at these studies that are going on with our universities and you're going, what is this? How does it pertain to or relate to what we're trying to do as a state and prepare our young people, to go out and make a living, support our state, drive our economics, make sure they've got providing for their families and the future generations. Have we looked at some of what we're offering to see if, there could be savings there?
Mm-hmm. We started in 2013, I think. 12 or 13, what we call looking at low producing programs. We looked at programs that have very low enrollments and have a requirement if they don't produce a certain number of graduates in a certain period of time, then the institution either has to have a program to turn the enrollment around or we eliminate the program. And I think we've eliminated over 300 programs, is that right, in about the last 4 years or so. I'll have to check that number. Sorry? Rollins says 321. So yes, we are doing that, and the way we get at that is by looking at enrollments in various programs, we ask the institutions to, as I said, track it, and if they're not able to turn the enrollment around, then the board will eliminate it, and we've, as I said, 321. The other thing we began doing at the same time is if an institution proposes a new degree, they've got to submit enrollment targets, and we monitor those. And if they don't meet those targets, I think we give them a certain amount of time to get them up, or we would eliminate those programs. We just started that 3 or 4 years ago, too.
Thank you.
Do you have a question? Or is it Representative Matt? Somebody over there is blinking. Or maybe just me punching buttons. Over here, well, it's my fault. But, Chancellor, I wish you'd just introduce to some of the committee members that are new, may not know your representatives that are here every day.
Sure.
In the House, so they'll have a contact and put a name with a face.
Be glad to. Roland Downs is Assistant Vice Chancellor. Is that what you are? Yeah. For government relations, Ashley Jones, they work together. Those are our two primary folks who work the Capitol. I'm always ready and willing to be here. Feel free to call me at any time. Shelley Nickel is with us as well. She's Executive Vice Chancellor. She oversees our fiscal area and planning. And I wanted her to be here in case I got any hard questions.
And committee members, I'll get you their contact numbers and how you can get a hold of them, because as questions come up. Chairman Dollar. Okay. So good. Okay, we'll get back to you in just a second. But thank you for your frank discussion. I think just sitting and answering questions on the spot. We appreciate you doing that, Mr. Chancellor.
Thank you.
Chairman Dollar would like to wrap up.
It just occurred to me as a question that Chairman Knight, point that he made about trying the effort to move college from a 5 and 6 year endeavor back to a 4 year. In 2009, the Board of Regents moved a full load, if you will, from 12 to 15 hours, and so that is I think a very practical justification for part of that. I said 100%, over 100% raise in that 10 years, but in 2009, I think it went up 25%, but the number of hours also went up close to about 20%, so, or whatever that works out to. But I did want to offer that. I failed to mention that earlier, and I think that needs to be, disclosed. Also, just felt that I would be remiss if I didn't, thank the Chancellor and everybody who is here for what they do. And I don't see this as an adversarial role at all. I think that we really are working together towards the same goals. So I just wanted to publicly, I've known the Chancellor for almost 20 years now when I was a student at university, and I just to thank him and for being here and offering his self. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm done.
Okay, thank you. Any other committee members? Question for Chairman Dollar? Okay, we're going to adjourn right now. And for committee members, it's up to you if you want to stay, but I have a gentleman, Chris Green from Student Finance. Chris, wave your hand. And that's going to just spend a little time talking about student finance. If you can stay, if you can't, I understand, you've got to go. And we'll just let Chris get set up. It's up to you. Okay.